Welcome to the Sunriver Anglers Fly Tying Corner, where each month we bring you a new fly pattern to give a try to on our Central Oregon lakes and rivers. In addition to showing you how to tie each pattern, I'll feature fishing technique tips and tricks, and I'll cover some of the entomology behind each pattern to help gain a better understanding of the bugs that we're trying to imitate. I have field tested each of the patterns that I feature each month to make sure that they catch fish. I'll cover tying instructions for the fly as well as materials to help you be able to recreate these patterns on your own vise. For this month's pattern, I'm going to tie an Amy's ant. This is a pattern designed by Jack Dennis, and it was originally tied for the one fly competition up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I have been tying and using this pattern here in Central Oregon to imitate a lot of our big beetles and ants. This is an excellent imitation both on our rivers and on our lakes, and I've had some really good success. So give the Amy's ant a try. I think you'll like it and you'll add it to your fly box. Before we get started tying this fly, let me briefly cover the materials. I'll cover in more detail each material as we tie the pattern. For a hook, I'm using a Firehole 7/18, and this particular one is tied in a size 8. You can range the size all the way down to about size 16, and you can tie larger sizes, say to imitate a salmon fly with salmon fly colors, maybe up to a size 4. So just depending on how you want to tie the Amy's ant, choose the hook that fits best. For thread, I'm using an Ultra 140 denier in black. I need a little bit of strength on this thread as I pinch down the foam tightly to the hook. So let's begin tying the Amy's ant. I'm going to begin with my thread up at the head position, and I'm going to tie a layer of thread all the way back to the tail set position. I need that nice layer of thread so that when I tie in my foam, there's something to grab onto. For the foam on this fly, I'm using a 2mm black foam, and I'm using 2 layers of it because we've got a couple folds that we do on this pattern. So you don't want to go too thick. You can go even smaller as you go smaller sized flies. So I'm going to take and cut a thin strip of my 2mm foam. I'm going to cut this wide enough to where it's about the width of the gape of the hook. And I will take and notch the one end of it. I'll just trim off the corners briefly, and then I'm going to tie that right on the tail set position with several firm wraps of thread. And before I wrap that up the hook, I'm going to lay down a layer of super glue, and then I will go ahead and wrap that all the way. I'll jump my thread up to the front of the hook, tie in that foam, and then I'm going to press the foam down and tie over it all the way back to the tail set position. And between the thread layer that I tied on initially and the glue, that foam shouldn't move on your fly. I'll return to the front of the foam, and I'm going to go ahead and clip this off to create the head on this pattern. And then I'll do the same thing I did with the back side of the fly. I'll just notch the corners of the foam off while it's in the hook. Now I'm going to cut a second segment of foam, and again that's going to be the width of the gape of the hook, and I'm going to do a reverse notch on this. I'm actually going to cut a V into the back side, and once I've got that established like I like it, I'll go ahead and tie this piece of foam in right at that tail set position where I tied the initial foam in place. For the legs on this pattern, I'm using a black red flake crazy legs that I really like because it gives lots of action to the fly. So now I'm going to take two pieces of my rubber legs and I'm going to tie them right on top of the foam with a couple, three soft wraps. And from there I'll go ahead and grab each side of the rubber legs and I'll slide those down just underneath that foam and kind of set them in place on each side of the hook. For the abdomen of this fly, I'm going to use a dubbing blend of a UV ice dub in black and a UV2 Diamond Bright in purple. The purple I've got is a little lighter than I prefer for this pattern, so I've mixed it with a little black UV ice dub just to bring the tone and bring the color of this pattern a little toward the darker shade. I mix about 50-50 roughly. And once I've got those legs set where I want them, I'm going to take just a small amount of my dubbing blend and dub an inch or a little bit more onto the thread and wrap that over the top of the rubber legs. This does a couple things. It covers up that thread layer on top of the foam, but it also helps spread my rubber legs and keep them in place. For the hackle, I'm using a Whiting Farms dry fly hackle in black, and you can amend your colors just to match whatever color you want to tie the Amy's in. In this case, using a black over purple really tends to give it a nice little segmentation look. So next, I'm going to go ahead and prepare a hackle by stripping off probably close to a half an inch of the barbs on the hackle stem. I do that to give myself plenty of length to tie that onto the area right ahead of the foam and the rubber legs. That gives me a little more room to work with, and I'll tie that right back to the back of that foam. And then I am going to go ahead and start to dub the body. Now, we've got a number of materials hanging around at this point in time, so materials control is really important on this fly. You want to go ahead and dub some material onto the thread, probably a good 3 to 4 inch length dubbing noodle on the thread, and then we'll go ahead and capture a few fibers as I wrap onto the abdomen of this fly. And then I'm going to take that entire mechanism and I'm going to spin it around in my bobbin, or spin it around the thread on my bobbin, and we'll go ahead and wind forward. Now that I've finished the dubbing, I'm going to wind the hackle all the way forward up through ribbing that fly and tie it off. And I'll finish up by clipping off the barbs relatively short on this fly. You can leave them longer if you wish, but I like to clip them short, and really make that segmentation kind of stand out on this pattern. Once I've finished trimming my hackle, I'll go ahead and take that foam that we've had hanging over the second layer of foam, and I'm going to fold that all the way over to the head position, and I'll tie that off, and then I'm going to wind backwards toward the abdomen dubbing and create a nice flat spot, and this is where my wing is going to lay. So next I'll tie in my underwing, and this is tied out of that UV shimmer. It's kind of that same purple color that I tied in the abdomen, which is one of the reasons I like this material. I'll go ahead and pre-trim the butts, and I'll tie those in right in that blank spot and hanging probably about the length of the foam. You can go a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, depending on your preference. For the wing, we can either use deer hair or elk hair. In this example pattern, I'm using a deer hair. So now I've cleaned my deer hair, all the underfur out, and I put it in a stacker and stack that so I have a nice clean clump of hair. And I'll go ahead and measure proportions. I'm going to tie this in roughly the length of the notch in the back of this pattern. And I'll take and measure that out. I'm going to pinch it between my thumb and forefinger, and I like to pre-cut that material so I don't have all the stray butts running all over the fly. And so I'll pre-trim it, then I'm going to tie that in right behind the head area, and I'll wind that through the butts to create a nice flat space again. So now I'm going to dub that thorax area, starting at the front and working my way backwards, back through that flat spot. With the dubbing finished, I'll take that upper piece of foam and I'll forward it backwards over the wing, and I'm going to tie that in right where I finished with the thread with several nice crisp wraps. And once I've got that done, I'm going to go ahead and trim that foam off, and then I'm going to notch it in terms of a kind of an arrow shape on the top of this fly. Once I'm happy with how everything's setting on the pattern, I'm going to grab my rubber legs, and I'll cut off 2 rubber legs and tie them in similar to how I did in the back of this pattern. I'll tie them in with soft wraps and then go ahead and trim them to length and reposition them on the fly to point out the sides, and then we'll tie them on with a little bit firmer wrap. The final step in this pattern is I'm going to go ahead and dub over that little segment left where I tied in my rubber legs with just a bit of dubbing to go ahead and spread those legs out. and then I'll go ahead and drop straight into a whip finish, and I'll whip finish this pattern to finish it up. You can whip finish it twice if you don't want to use glue, or you can use a little dab of glue on the underside where the knot cinches up. So let me rotate this fly around in the vise so you can see all sides of the Amy's ant. So that has been your Sunriver Anglers fly tying corner for this month. You can tie this in all kinds of different colors, and just to suit your individual preference. It can be tied to imitate grasshoppers. It can be tied to imitate salmon flies. It can be tied to imitate big beetles, little ants, just depending on the size and colors you choose to put on this particular pattern. So give it a try. I think you'll like the Amy's ant. If you like what you see, please subscribe to this YouTube page and follow Sunriver Anglers on Facebook. Thanks for watching.